Welcome back, everyone, to the DGS Presents YouTube channel. Last time we were talking about Call of Cthulhu, specifically 3rd edition, some of the older stuff, but I promised that we would do an episode not only on magic, but maybe to look at some of the interesting settings that came out for the game. Specifically, this one right here, Cthulhu Dark Ages. Now, Cthulhu Dark Ages was originally released in the early 2000s. I believe it was like 2004. And it actually looked like, I'll show you really quick. This is the one that I have. This was the one that was released for 6th edition and uses the standard BRP rules. But later on, it was extended to 7th edition recently. And very, very similar. There's a few extra things in this newer edition, but it's a very interesting setting and rule book in and of itself, which contains a lot of cool settings and scenarios and monsters and the historical elements and kings and queens and ancient tomes and folios and forbidden knowledge. But most of it, for the most part, takes place in Britain, in the British Isles, between about the 10th century and earlier, all the way back to maybe the late Roman period during the founding of maybe like Londinium. And this here is the map from the 7th edition book, which shows us some interesting places in England where we can have adventures. So, for instance, if you look over there to the west, kind of by Wales, you'll see an area called Aberfraw. And there's some things that go on there in Aberfraw. There is a Barcladiad Yagares, the apron full of the giantess, which is a Neolithic burial mound near Aberfraw, and the locals tell of an ancient tale of bloody, fire-filled sacrifices to a dark mother in the deepest chamber of the burial mound. On dark nights, some say that lights have recently been seen coming from inside the mound. And if you look in the eastern area of Britain there, you'll see the very important city of Canterbury. Now, some things go on in Canterbury as well. There's some mythos related things there, including the 7 gates of the Roman Canterbury. They were a last-ditch effort by the Romans to maintain their hold on the island. If 7 carefully crafted keys are brought to the 7 corresponding gates at the appropriate hour, the gates of Limbo are thrown open, and the Devrog issue forth to slay all they will find. I'll talk about the Devrog a little bit later. They're like these dwarves that inhabit the corpses of basically dead bodies and go up and terrorize the world. The Romans never managed to acquire all the keys, and the island was eventually lost. Maybe the Danes are looking for the keys, perhaps hoping to stop the Archbishop from acquiring them. Or London, right? Formerly Londinium. And this is this mythos tale here. It says, as a city grows, the unsavory elements grow as well. From Damascus, a lone sorcerer and follower of Azathoth, right, I'll recognize that name, came into the city via Byzantine trader. Once within the walls, she established herself as someone that can commune with the spirits and see the future. She has attracted a following among London's wealthier citizens, all of whom hope to see their fortunes grow. So far, her actions have been fairly innocuous. However, now that she has a large following that can protect and provide her with the necessary sacrifices, she plans to resume her ambition, opening a gateway to Azathoth, which of course, might end the world as we know it. Now, in this book, there are a number of things. So, for instance, like there's some historical background, like the kings of Anglo-Saxon England. We have like Alfred the Great and Ethelred the Unready and some of the old obscure Saxon kings. Basically, historical figures that we're relatively familiar with, including some that are lost in the shadowy episodes of history. And also the boroughs of Anglo-Saxon Wessex, right? These different areas that investigators can operate in. Now, you're not going to have a typical investigator in this game, right? You're going to be playing maybe a knight or a trader or a nobleman or maybe a priest or even a nun. Maybe somebody that's a kind of semi-pagan man that lives out in the wilderness. So you're not going to have a typical investigator, but you will be exposed, obviously, the typical mythos elements and creatures and mysteries. So religion and paganism. Let me pull that up real quick here. Now, obviously, in the Dark Ages, when this period, basically between the fall of Rome and the High Middle Ages, which probably late 11th century, basically the start of the Crusades, you had different you know kings and queens ruling, but it was a special time there in Britain because paganism hadn't been completely stamped out. It was still part of the cultural and political realm, and there were still pagans about. In this book, there are some interesting things regarding amulets and charms that might show up. Sprigs of herbs, semi-precious stones, amethyst, fossilized bones, seashells or crystals, all of these things which semi-pagan Britons still kind of hold to and believe in. And in some cases, they may use these items to commune with their ancient gods, their kind of Nordic or Celtic gods, or to Christian saints. Sometimes a plowman, may inadvertently dig up some ancient artifact from the great old ones, or some Cthulhu based uh, item, right, which will bring upon disaster to the community. Some of the pagan gods obviously included Wotan or Woden, the king of the gods, or Frigg, his queen, Estra, which is a fertility goddess, and you'll recognize that name because it sounds like Easter, and that's really where we get the word Easter. Her symbol is the rabbit, interestingly enough. But in 597, Augustine went from Rome to Canterbury and he converted the king of Kent to Christianity. So really the island began to rapidly become Christian as the centuries went on. Now, in some cases, there was Satanism, right, or devil worship going on, both in Britain and on the continent. There's a section of the book that talks about the heresy of Orleans, where nuns, monks, and even a confessor to the Queen of France engaged in bloody rituals, including infanticide to the devil. And they were ultimately arrested, and some of them were burned, and others recanted. Now, the book also includes new spells in magic. So, for instance, and I'm going to talk more about magic in a second, but here's an example. So, become spectral. Right, this is a new spell that appears in this text, and the cost is 1 magic point per round of duration. You lose 1d4 sanity points, and casting times 1 round. It allows the caster to become to observers almost kind of invisible, right, or spectral. So that the caster's sight and hearing remain attuned to the material plane, but with a distant, less distinct character, as if a cold mist surrounds them. But the caster can move normally. Now, last episode, I talked about magic and how it worked in Call of Cthulhu, 6th edition and earlier. Obviously, we're talking about 3rd edition last time, which is really old. That's 1983. But through 6th edition, and this is generally the way it works in 7th as well, there are certain things that have to be done for an investigator or character to obtain and use magic. So on this slide, I have an example. The first thing you generally do in Call of Cthulhu is you find a mythos book, manuscript, or scroll, maybe an inscription. Now, you can also be taught magic from a mythos being or someone else. But typically, if you're getting it from a book or some sort of manuscript or something, there's a few guidelines to follow here. The investigator will typically skim the book, and this will cost half sanity points that the book normally it inflicts on you and takes from you. And it will not increase your Cthulhu Mythos score, but it will tell the investigator what the text is about. So you'll figure out maybe what spells might be in it or might give you a good idea whether or not you want to continue reading it. And if you do, that we move on to part 3 here, full study of the text. And that will take a set number of results depending on the book, or the keeper can roll 2d6 to get you a random number of months. And this will tell you how long you need to study it. And this will result in sanity loss with Cthulhu mythos gain. So as your knowledge of the mythos increases, your sanity goes down, right? You become more and more unhinged and well, crazy. Then, if you get to 4, upon completion of the study of the book, the keeper will ask typically for like an int roll, typically times 3, to determine if a spell can be learned. So you look at your int, you times it by 3, you throw a couple percentile die. If you roll under, hey, you might be able to learn a spell in there. Now, if you do learn the spell and you want to cast it, it will cost magic points. And magic points, when you start really in this game and 6th edition earlier, is equivalent to your power. So when you do cast the spell, you will lose sanity loss. And some spells allow for more points to be extended for a greater result. So for instance, if you want to like open a gate to a different plane, or you want to create some sort of magical barrier, you can expend more of your magic points to have a greater effect. You gain these magic points back through rest over like a 24-hour period. Now, some spells also use a resistance table. If you're trying to cast a spell against, for instance, another sorcerer or some sort of otherworldly being that might have some sort of resistance, you may have to consult the resistance table. And again, that would be pre-7th edition, right, where you're using the resistance table. Now, also, there is a way to increase your power, right, which is one of your attributes, not your magic points, but your power, and that involves actually casting spells, using the resistance table, and overcoming some sort of magical barrier or some other being or something. And if that is the case, you can actually add to your power and you become a sorcerer, right? Somebody who's gaining and magical ability, but typically it comes at the expense of sanity. So think of the completely insane cultist, right? Now, in this book also, we have monsters. And there are a lot of cool monsters actually in the book. For instance, this one, the Cold One. And this is a creature that basically comes out of blizzards and squalls and vertiginous winds. And if we look here at his stats, I will bring them up here. We see the Cold One. Here are his base stats, and he doesn't really have any strength or constitution because he's kind of basically ethereal. But he has the other, these are 7th edition attributes. He could fly, right? A certain number of hit points. He may be able to cast spells, does have magic points, and he can freeze you. The Cold One, it says here that if he hits you with an attack, he can drain 1 to d10 Constitution points from you and 1 to 2 hit points. And if you suffer a certain amount of Constitution hit points loss, you're basically killed, right? Some other creatures in this book include the Q Sith, that's C-U and then S-I-T-H, right, like the Star Wars creature. The Q Sith, these are servants of the lords of Tindalos. And the Q Sith prowl the forests of Fife and the eastern coast of Britain. These fierce warriors wear the skulls and pelts of wolves, dyed green, and strike fear into their enemies' hearts and honor their precious masters. So think of that, was it the Crichton book, like the Eaters of the Dead? Those kind of guys, right? Like these kind of primitive, pagan, cannibalistic people that live out in, uncivilized regions of the world, the unmapped regions of the world, right? There are also the Dvorg, which I talked about a little bit earlier. These are these dwarves which inhabit corpses. They're like these strange, otherworldly creatures that basically take control of dead bodies. You have demons, cultists. There's also old ones, and not to be confused with the Cthulhu old ones. These are like the old ones, almost like from like Celtic mythology, or maybe, maybe even Roman mythology, where there are these ancient beings who existed before men. In this case, in this text, we're told that these are the servants of Yog Sothoth, wander the earth and sometimes meddle in the affairs of men. There's also dragons and wights and vampires. And my favorite one, for instance, is Pontius Pilate. So Pontius Pilate's in Britain, and he's like a lord of the vampires. So that's pretty wild. Now let's see, what else do we have here. So settings. There are some interesting settings in the book. So for instance, this little town here, this Anglo-Saxon town of Totbur. In this town, there's all these different encounters that you may have. There's like parish priest, and there's like a warehouse and a granary and this kind of thing. And you're introduced to the people in the town, and there's a series of adventures that you can go on as an investigator when you go to Totbur. In the appendix of this book, there's also a number of characters in there that you can play, right? Priests, nuns, warriors. There's the thanes, right? It can be a thane of like a warlord. And as a side note, one thing I didn't mention is in this book there's something called the Verguild, which is like the price somebody has on their life. It's so if you kill somebody, right, they have a certain price on their life that in order to atone for the murder you would have to pay, and that's called the Verguild. But yeah, this is a fun setting. I obviously can't go into it all. There's a ton of stuff in here. There's lots of creatures, and there's magical books. And like I said earlier, each magic book takes a certain amount of time to learn. May take months to learn. It may cost you sanity, but it might have spells in it, right? And there's all these books and manuscripts and inscriptions and stuff scattered all over the British Isles that your investigators can go out and discover. But yeah, so that is Cthulhu Dark Ages. So thanks for stopping by. If you like this stuff, please like and subscribe, and we will continue on with this stuff. I think maybe we're going to be doing Thieves World next time, but we'll see. So thanks for coming,